I'm one of them, actually.
Sorry.
Mr. Linder?
Thank you. I forgot my question. Okay, in these states with these regulatory, where there is regulation, who's the enforcement agency, and how do they enforce and penalize somebody that would try and access one of these, aside from maybe outside of the boundaries, both on the within the system side, and is there enforcement from outside from the person that's trying to access the site?
I can obviously only answer that question to a point because I report what we see on our side to the regulator, which is a requirement in New Jersey to hold our license. However, what they do with that information once we send it off is something we're not privileged to. But I do know that they have a database of users that are seen to be pushing the line in terms of geolocation and using different fraud tools to try and get around it.
I have a question for Mr. Pollack in respect to the New Jersey Gambling Commission. In the onset of this effort in New Jersey, did they have to contract with outside companies to get iGaming up and running?
Yes, they did.
And could you?
We were not one of them. But yeah, no. Obviously, they did need to contract with outside agencies. It was such a new area, and to no surprise, they did reach out to someone from Europe, which is where the history of online gaming has been to date. They are no longer contracted, as is typical in most states. Once you climb the learning curve, you don't need the outside contractors. But initially, they did. I don't think that's necessarily, as more and more states go online, I think that they can reach out to existing states more so than the original states did.
Okay, thank you. And kind of a question, I'll open it up to the panel. In respect to the lower than anticipated revenue in New Jersey, and frankly in the other markets, what can be done to rectify that? What might we anticipate here in California? And a great deal of the discussion in and around internet poker here in California has been around who might be authorized and quote unquote limiting competition per se, and how that might factor into kind of a robust, thriving market.
Yeah, so I can probably talk to the market size. So I think in terms of what we've seen in Nevada and New Jersey, the market size was less than we initially anticipated. I think people have referenced the fact that it was difficult to get money on the sites and to geolocate early on in that process. So if you look at any market, typically the heavy users are early adopters, are quite important to the proliferation of that market. And in this example, those early adopters had a pretty difficult experience. And so I think the market is now sort of growing again, but it is going to take some time. I think as we look to new markets, we expect to see much larger growth initially as the consumer funnel will be much more efficient. But I think as you look at poker specifically, liquidity isn't so important. And to date, the only liquidity sharing between two states is that of Nevada and Delaware. And so there needs to be, with smaller states, an expansion of liquidity sharing in order to enable much larger markets. I think this is one of the reasons why California is so attractive, just given the pure scale of the state. There's going to be enough liquidity that justifies a poker playing experience that's just much more fun and entertaining than exists today in the other states. If you look at poker, what's really fun is playing it. If you look at the World Series of Poker, for example, it's the largest poker tournament in the world, right? It's on ESPN. There's a lot of excitement around that. You can play in a small satellite tournament to have a chance to win $10 million. That excitement and energy around large-scale poker tournaments doesn't exist in places where there isn't large shared liquidity or large population bases with interstate liquidity like California. So we believe the marketing message, the excitement and the buzz through social media and through people being able to play with their friends or in tournaments that their friends are also playing in will create buzz and excitement that then generates a much larger market. And also, when you're dealing with a larger market, you have much larger marketing budgets. You'll have many more television shows designed at the California market where people will start watching poker and getting engaged in it again, which will create excitement. The markets today, just given the population sizes, aren't really big enough to justify significant marketing expenditures, which then justifies the growth in the market. So I think California is different, just to summarize quickly, in a couple different ways. One, poker's been here for 50 years, right? People have been playing poker. It over-indexes on a per capita basis. It's just a bigger market from that perspective. Two, the funnel's going to be dramatically improved. And three, the liquidity will not be an issue in holding the market back.
I'd like to add something to that. There's been a number of reasons why online gaming has not met expectations in those existing states. One of them is that the fault lied in the expectations to begin with. But among other things, among other reasons, is that the marketing of online gaming is so new that they're in the process right now of essentially trying to figure out what kind of message do you send and how do you send it. But I think that the key is to get to the second part of your question is that who should be allowed to participate. I strongly believe, and this is something that's not new, and I think I would say this in any state, strongly believe that it has to be handled by those existing land-based operators that operate within the state. That's how you advance public policy. To have it out there as something that people can gamble on without having to be getting a message from brick and mortar facilities to come to those facilities, I just don't see that as being in a best position to advance public policy.
Any other questions from the members? Ms. Waldron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, there's kind of a lot of questions. It's almost like you don't know exactly what to ask, but it sounds like you've really got a lot of it covered, even checking mortality, and I was looking at all the stopgaps. Regarding people who are using those little Wi-Fi devices, but they're close to the border, say, of the state, I could see maybe they're picking up a signal from across, or vice versa. They're outside the state that has regulated iPoker, and they're picking up a signal inside. How do you deal with that? And is that something that can be overcome?
That's a good question. When we triangulate a user using Wi-Fi data, we require more than one Wi-Fi router to be near the user. So we get an accuracy radius when we get the data back. And essentially, we look at that accuracy radius and we see if it meets the requirements. So in a regulated market at the moment, if the accuracy radius was greater than 250 meters, we would say that that user wasn't pinpoint accurate enough. In addition, we have a map of where the border lies. So, and from that map, we add a little buffer zone. So we bring in your border, let's say 15 meters. And we ensure that the accuracy radius of the data that we pull never goes across or enter that buffer zone, and definitely never goes across the border zone. And so because of those different methods, plus the fraud checks on top, it just means that users aren't located across the border. However, your question actually brings up something that can happen when you locate a user using cellular triangulation. So cell towers in Nevada are often positioned in California, and therefore a user could falsely be getting located in California when they're probably actually in the Tahoe region. But for that reason, we would need to layer on other checks if we were to allow a user to proceed with gaming when we located them using a cell tower. Thank you.
Okay, any final questions for this panel? Seeing none, let me thank you all. I know the three of you have traveled a great distance to be here with us today and share your expertise and insight, and we certainly very much appreciate that, and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time we're going to move to our third panel, enforcement and regulation. What would be needed from a regulatory standpoint to implement and regulate iPoker in California. We have Mr. Schutz, Ms. Carr, Ms. Baxter, and Mr. Duvall. If you would approach. Members, these are representatives of both the Gaming Commission and the Department of Justice. Why don't we begin with Mr. Schutz?
I want to thank Chairman Gray and the members of the committee for having us here today. I want to thank my colleague, Anna, for assisting me in preparation of this, and I'm honored to sit at this table with two people from our bureau that we work most cooperatively to, Mr. Diwali and Ms. Luna Baxter, and I would especially like to compliment Ms. Luna Baxter, who we have been dragging each other across the country, learning about this art for some time now. 3 years ago, we were, a group of us from the commission were summoned to the Capitol building, and it was explained to us that they wanted our commission to develop a fluency in the area of iPoker and iGaming, and it was desired that in the event that it was the will of the people of the state of California, the legislature, and the governor to have iGaming and or iPoker, that we would be prepared to meet that challenge. We have basically proceeded along three different lines. The first is we made an effort to achieve this fluency and to be prepared, and I'll talk about that briefly. I also want to discuss the status of what our opinion is as to what the experience in the United States among the three areas that have been provided with legal internet gaming. And then I want to talk about the last thing is, are we prepared as are the regulatory assets in this state prepared to regulate this beast should it go forward? Starting back with what we have done as a commission to learn things, we established an iGaming resource center early on. We started this program in late 2011. We developed a library, a series of articles, things of that sort. We also began to establish a database of legislative language, regulations, technical standards, internal controls, and minimum internal controls that are used around the world. We also began what we call our Friday visits, which is where we have been inviting vendors and operators from around the world into the commission headquarters on Fridays typically. The people attending these sessions are the legislative consultants, the members of the Department of Justice Indian Gaming Law section, people from the Bureau of Gambling Control, people from the Commission, the Lottery Office, and basically who's ever interested. We have met with over 30 different providers of internet services. We have met with the chair of Amaya and the senior executives of PokerStars and Full Tilt Poker. The chair and the past chair and senior members of the Nevada Gaming Control Board have visited us here and explained what they do to regulate this. The chief executive of the Isle of Man Regulatory Authority has come and visited us as I visited him in the Isle of Man. The CEO of GeoComply, which was Anna Sainsbury that just left you. We've had two different affiliate providers. We've had the chair and senior executives of Ultimate Poker visit us, the CEO of Caesars Interactive. We've had executives from NetSweeper, CAMS, Income Access, Vanteef, Aristocrat, Aristotle, BMM, GLI, and a great many others. And these people have been, at their own expense, flown in and helped us comprehend what this is all about and answered numerous questions that we've had. We have also traveled throughout the United States and the world. I personally have gone to China, London 3 times, Montreal, the Isle of Man, and across the United States. And in case anybody's worried about that, that's all been financed by the Bank of Richard, so that's not coming into state expense. We have had 4 trips, or I have had 4 trips in the last 18 months to the Division of Gaming Enforcement in the state of New Jersey. The regulators in the state of New Jersey have opened their arms and their offices to us to walk us through all the technical intricacies of regulating internet gaming. We have visited the offices of PokerStars, Full Tilt Poker, Ultimate Poker, Betfair, Caesars, Playtech, 888, and others around the world. We have visited and established relationship with regulators in New Jersey, the Isle of Man, Gibraltar, Malta, Canada, Denmark, the United Kingdom, Nevada, Alderney, Pennsylvania, and others. I want to talk about what we think is the status as regulators of the internet scene in the United States. things that we believe are working are things like the ability to establish sound technical standards and audit protections for the platforms. We figured this is existing science. We are quite comfortable with it. The ability to geolocate with an extraordinarily high rate of success. I think Ms. Sainsbury just spoke to that issue. We are very comfortable there, and I've been to Nevada 4 times and to go over their geolocation, their issues, and also to New Jersey on a number of occasions. The ability to offer very strong anti-money laundering compliance. And one has to remember is once you have very good geolocation, you know where the person is, you have strong age and identity, you know who the person is, and also because of the very nature of the Internet experience, you have complete data recovery of every transaction he's been involved in. That is not an ideal scenario to launder money when they know who you are, where you are, and every transaction that you're involved in. It is probably the least ideal environment. We believe that there is a strong ability to offer know your customer routines, particularly with age and identity issues. There have been a few instances in the state of New Jersey, the regulators have discussed with me, of underage gambling, but in each and every of those instances, that was a case of not bad regulation, but of bad parenting. There is ability, we believe there's an ability to minimize game collusion and anti-robotic play. It's kind of interesting. They place on the biggest poker game in the world, which is played by robots, is, of course, the stock market. But what you will find in this, that they can program through predictive analytics, play optimum play, and they will set these down and play them. And one of the interesting thing is, the first way they detected that was the mouse click was always on exactly the same pixel. And when they noticed that it was actually on the same pixel every time, they knew it was robotic play. Then the bad guys kind of figured out they needed to move it, and so then they developed routines and analytics that would detect how, whenever it was moving through a set routine across pixels on the mouse button, they knew it was robotic play. And that drama will go on forever. They will get better and we will get better. But that's interesting. But I'm very comfortable with robotic play and things of that sort. I think we are able to build very strong protections for the vulnerable. This is the problem in pathological gambler. We can do things like set loss limits, session limits, all of those types of things. And, of course, they will have a feature of an exclusion list, which is to suggest that a person doesn't want to be mailed things and be able to play on the system. He won't or she won't. I think we have developed a clear, positive ways of protecting player accounts. There was the situation with Full Tilt many years ago where a sizable amount of money went disappearing that were being held in player accounts. We have absolutely great systems to protect that now. And I think we have incredible records retention. Record retention better than in the brick and mortar industry, because the vast majority or a great many of the transactions that take place in a brick and mortar environment, there's no receipts and there's no way to capture them. In a digital environment, you have absolutely perfect recall. Areas that I believe need improvement are things like payments. And this is not a technical issue, this is an institutional issue, and that has been a clear and unequivocal problem. There is a player resistance to long and intrusive and cumbersome enrollment processes. It's found that enrollment fatigue sets in at about the 6th mouse click trying to enroll, and then it all of a sudden gets to work. If you study the process by which players enroll, the greatest period of drop-off, that is when they leave the process, is when they are asked their Social Security number. And some of the more innovative firms, because people are just not necessarily avoiding taxes or anything, people are uncomfortable putting their Social Security number on a computer environment. They just are. And they have gone to last 4 Social Security, which has slowed down that resistance someplace in Atlantic City. There has been an issue, I think, with the appropriate regulatory controls on affiliates, and I think that's a science that we're still trying to improve on how we keep control of the affiliates. And I remember talking to the head of the Nevada Gaming Control Board 3 years ago about those challenges. We are not in the United States used to affiliates as gambling marketers, and I still think we need to get a little bit better there. And there's also the continued presence of unlicensed and unregulated sites. And some of these, unfortunately, markets work. And when we initially, in some of the environments like New Jersey, launched, we were having problems with geolocation. We were getting, as it was mentioned, a lot of false positives. And you had to enroll, and that was lengthy. And you had to go through all these approval processes, and the technology was still breaking in. And so people would go to the unregulated sites or unlicensed sites, and that's natural because markets do work. I believe that as these processes get smoother, a lot of those illegal sites and unlicensed sites will disappear. The last area I want to talk about is the challenges imposed on our regulatory assets in this state. Kind of the question is, can we do this? One thing that I think needs to be unquestionably understood is the terrestrial regulation and digital regulation in an internet delivery system for gambling products are fundamentally different issues. And I was trying to think of a story that I could tell you that would rub that in. And I joined the gambling industry in 1971. I started dealing at night at Harris. And I spent about 40 years in that industry before joining the state service. Actually, I spent more than 40 years in that industry, but 40 years is enough. And I can walk into a casino now, and I can tell you how the dealers are clearing their hands and if they're clearing their hands appropriately. I don't go in there to do that, but after working in the industry for 40 years, that just comes naturally. I can see if the dealers are approving checks correctly. I can see that if the cash transaction's being turned correctly. I can see if they're protecting the top of the decks against daubs and stuff. That's second nature. And that's kind of what I did. I was very much involved with compliance when I ran casinos. I can sit and stare at a computer server all day, and I don't have a hint if anything's going wrong in that device. And I tell you this story only to suggest they are fundamentally different activities, regulating in the digital environment and regulating in the terrestrial environment. One of the things that would be a little different is currently we are not used to complex suitability investigations on an international scale. Most of our stuff is more local. That would take a little bit of adjustment, I would suggest. And international investigations going cross-cultural and whatnot are a tricky event, how you get good and accurate information, and even what you can and cannot ask. I have every reason to believe we could deal with that quite quickly. One of the biggest challenges we have is we do not have a gaming lab per se. It was mentioned earlier, the state of New Jersey launched. They had a long-standing, very competent gaming lab. It's run by a gentleman by the name of Eric Weiss, who has been most helpful to Ms. Stacy Luna Baxter and myself on a number of occasions. I have spent 4 days in their offices in New Jersey going through that. They did not rely on any outside labs at all. The state of Nevada had a very good lab run by Jim Barbary, and I've been over there on a number of instances. The Nevada did shorten up their lab, but all of those people were also BMM opened a site in Las Vegas at the same time, and GLI had a site. So when the people that left the Gaming Control Board, they went to work for these sites. So it was the same people, just under different corporate headings. They had a very good lab. We do not have this type of lab, and we would be the first state ever to launch without it. And that's not to suggest that it can't be done. It's just an adjustment that we need to do. It's often suggested that there are outside companies that can help, the GLIs and the BMMs of the world. I agree with that, and those people have been here, both of them, to present to us and talk us through this situation. But we still need a core group within our regulatory assets to make sure that we're getting good information from them. It's like if you go in for brain surgery, you're just not going to you're going to get a second opinion from someone you trust, and we need that in-house expertise. That's going to take a little time. I also would argue that our regulatory assets are, to an extent, struggling with what we have right now. I want to just cite my background a little bit. I've worked in the states of New Jersey, Mississippi, Louisiana, Nevada. I've been licensed over 100 different jurisdictions across the United States. I've taught regulation in China and Europe and across the United States. It is my perception that right now we have an extraordinarily talented people within the regulatory assets that we have, but we don't have enough, and we don't have the skill sets that we need. We need greater training. And again, I don't want anyone to interpret this as being critical of the people. We just need to beef it up a little bit. And I think that that's a little bit of a fair opinion, because I am experienced with regulatory environments across the country. A lot of it comes down to the fact that with time and money we can accomplish anything if it is the will of the people, it is the will of this legislative body, and if it is the will of the government that we shall have this, we will do our best to get it up and running and be a model for the rest of the United States. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. This time, we'll go ahead and move to Ms. Luna Baxter.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gray and members of the committee. Stacy Luna Baxter, Assistant Chief with the Bureau of Gambling Control, having oversight over the Bureau's licensing and game review processes. Thank you for this opportunity to provide this testimony. The Bureau of Gambling Control's mission is to ensure the integrity of gambling in California. The Bureau regulates gambling activities in California to ensure gaming is conducted honestly, competitively, and free from criminal and corrupt elements. In general, the Bureau is responsible for investigating the qualifications of applicants, monitoring the conduct of all licensees and others having involvement within gambling operations, investigating suspected criminal activity and violations, complaints against licensees or other persons associated with gambling operations, monitoring compliance with applicable gaming laws, and initiate, when appropriate, disciplinary action, as well as reviewing and approving or denying or requiring the modification of how a controlled game is played within the gaming establishments. The Bureau is currently responsible for the regulatory oversight, compliance, and enforcement of 89 card rooms, 35 third-party providers of proposition player services, 34 remote color bingo organizations, and the compact compliance of 60 tribal casinos. The Bureau is 100% special funded by the Gambling Control Fund and the Indian Gaming Special Distribution Fund for a total budget of approximately $26 million and 191 authorized positions, 47 of which are sworn officers. Since the legislature's initial consideration of Internet poker, the Bureau has kept abreast of issues and concerns identified, has worked with several legislators and their legislative staff to identify and discuss the issues and concerns of the Bureau should California regulate Internet poker, and have attended multiple conferences regarding Internet poker and the industry of Internet gaming. And as Commissioner Schutz has already mentioned, the Commission has been instrumental in bringing us regulators that have experience regulating Internet gaming, as well as those members of the Internet gaming industry itself. That has been most helpful to us, being able to talk to those regulators and those already within those industries. So we thank the Commission for doing that. From the licensing perspective, if an Internet poker bill passes, we face two major challenges. As Commissioner Schutz has already stated, we need the sufficient resources to regulate this new industry, and being afforded adequate time to conduct a thorough investigation. The Bureau is no stranger to licensing. The Bureau currently conducts finding of suitability background investigations for the multiple licensing types within California's regulated gaming industry. As such, we do have the knowledge and the expertise necessary to conduct thorough background investigations and make recommendations to the Commission regarding the suitability of those applicants who will be applying to conduct Internet poker within California. These background investigations are very thorough and extensive, covering financial, legal, employment, business associations, criminal history, as well as their gaming license statuses within other jurisdictions. A thorough background investigation takes several months for a non-complex applicant, and much longer if the applicant is financially complex, located out of state or out of country, or the investigation itself reveals derogatory or concerning information. Legalizing Internet poker in California would add additional licensing types and workload for the Bureau of Gambling Control. A redirection of existing resources is not possible. As you've already heard, the Bureau is significantly understaffed with resources as it is. The amount of staff the Bureau will require to complete the background investigations will depend on the mandated timeframes outlined in legislation. In addition, our challenge will be to select, background, hire, and train the additional resources as quickly as possible to meet those mandated timeframes. To assist with this challenge, the legislation must include a framework to provide the necessary immediate startup funding that will be needed, provide adequate ongoing expenditure authority, and the ability to immediately administratively establish the additional positions that will be needed. In addition to sufficient resources, the Bureau needs to be afforded a reasonable amount of time to conduct its background investigation. The Bureau takes a significant amount of pride in the work it performs, and it will not compromise its investigations. It's important to note that the Bureau cannot accept an application or fees until the regulatory framework is completed, which will take several months. In addition, once an applicant has submitted their application, it oftentimes is not complete, and it usually takes weeks, if not months, to work with the applicant to get their application complete. It is not until that application is complete that we are able to begin the in-depth background investigation. When completed, the Bureau must submit its investigative report and suitability recommendation to the Gambling Control Commission approximately 45 days prior to being able to be scheduled for a public hearing. We ask that the legislature please keep these timeframes in mind when drafting the legislation. Thank you again for this opportunity. Assistant Chief Nathan Diwali will present regarding the Bureau's needs for the compliance and enforcement side.